Hello and welcome to American Stories. I'm Saida Pagan. Our guest for this episode is Brian Fitzpatrick. He is an award-winning Southern California-based science fiction writer who has authored a number of novels, short stories, and screenplays. Brian is probably best known for the action thriller trilogy titled Mechcraft. Welcome to our program, Brian.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here. This is great.
For those of us who are just discovering your work, define what Metcraft means and tell us about your 15-year-old protagonist, Jake London.
Oh, this is so great. Back in 2014, I discovered an article in a medical journal about how nanotechnology was going to be used in the medical field. Nanotechnology is like microscopic, programmable robots, if you will, and they are programmed to do a task. Well, I read in this article that they would be able to inject millions of nanotechnology, little nano robots into a person, and the robots would be programmed to attack and destroy cancer cells and then deactivate and flush out of the system. And they said that was the near future. And I was so blown away by the concept that I said, well, my mind, of course, started wandering. I said, what if this nanotechnology inside of a person was sentient, could think and act and do things, and it could communicate with its host telepathically, and they worked together, and the host could summon that technology out of their skin to become a tool or a weapon or device or anything like that. And that was the spark of the idea of the story. The way Jake London comes into this is my story, the scientists who had developed this could not agree on how best to serve mankind, and they ended up degrading to the point of arguing, became fighting, became an all-out war between three different belief systems. And they all, for 20 years in Los Angeles, there was like a stalemate. And along comes Jake London. He's the first ever person actually born with this nanotechnology already in him, because his parents were two of the scientists who had all the scientists had injected themselves with this stuff. And he's the first ever born with it. And so all of these three warring factions decide, oh, he's going to be a game changer. His powers are going to be better or different or strange. And so they all want to control him. And that's this poor innocent kid is just discovering what it's like to be a teenager. And now he's got this power in him, and he's going to be the savior of the world. And he doesn't even know it yet.
What inspired you in general to come up with this idea? I mean, it's a novel idea to say the least.
I've always been a super fan of science fiction, and especially science fiction slash horror, like the Aliens or The Thing. And I wanted to tell a tale that was both intense and maybe a little gritty, but also had a lot of heart. And I thought, that the sort of adolescence, you're coming of age and you're going through so much already, and then add in, world changing abilities, and you're thrown into a world you're not familiar with. I thought was just a really good catalyst for telling a tale about growing up, essentially, set against this backdrop of, a violent world of scientists who have become these warriors who are determined that they are right. And that's the thing. Everybody in this book thinks that they're right. Nobody thinks of themselves as the bad guy, and they all think they're correct, and almost none of them are.
What about research? I'm sure that there was quite a bit of research that went into this.
There was, especially once I read that medical article that in the medical journal. I started researching where nanotechnology was in general, and it was kind of mind blowing. The scientists have been able to really harness this idea of literally microscopic level computers that can do tasks if they're programmed to. And the deeper I dove, the more I realized it's almost too much research. I had to kind of pull back so my imagination could take over and do the things I wanted this technology to do. Because even though it's science fiction, it reads very fairy tale-ish in the sense of um, the technology is so advanced it feels like magic to the layperson.
What kind of reaction have you received to your trilogy?
Oh, it's been wonderful, and the audience has been fantastic. I didn't have a marketing team or PR firm, so when the books were coming out, I really took it upon myself to build a grassroots fan base, and by posting on social media and doing events and where I just talk about what's coming and the idea and the characters and things. And I've eventually just built up this great social media following that I are just a wonderful people, and I love engaging with them, and I love doing live events. And I would say the books have all three books have gone number one on Amazon several times over, and so that kind of tells me I'm on the right track with this. And my publisher has said they want more, so that's also a good sign. That's also a really good sign when they tell you they want more.
Yeah, speaking of that, so you did a trilogy, which is, I mean, a massive undertaking. Tell us about that journey and that process of writing a trilogy about Mechcraft.
Well, that was the cool thing. This actually began life as a screenplay. I'm mostly a screenwriter. And the screenplay did well in contests and actually got me meetings back in the 2014, 15. It got me meetings with like Sony and Warner Brothers and some agents. And they all said the same thing. They loved the concept, they loved the story, but because there was no built-in fan base, no IP, they just felt it was too expensive to take a chance on. And so I was heartbroken, of course. But a friend of mine said, "Hey, why don't you convert this to a novel and build a fan base? And then those same agents and studios will come to you because you've got this fan base." And I said, "Well, okay." At first, I didn't want to because I'd just done so much work on the screenplay. I was like, "No." But he was right. And I converted it to the screenplay to the first novel, and I fell in love with the novel writing process. I loved getting into the characters' heads, adding more scenes if I wanted, doing much more freedom. And from there, I got it. A publisher took it on, and that publisher ended up wanting the sequels as well. And I was like, I had notes for the sequels, but I hadn't written them. So during the pandemic, it was a difficult time for everyone. But I wrote two books during that time period, and the publisher put them all out.
And you mentioned that your fan base is looking for more. So could there be even a fourth installment in this?
There is actually another full trilogy of Metcraft books in my head and somewhat written on paper in an outline form, but I haven't been able to get down to those yet because of my other projects.
So, speaking of your other projects, tell us what else you have been working on.
Oh yeah, so much. I was fortunate last year to be invited to write a fantasy novel, which is definitely leaving my norm. I'm mostly sci-fi. A fantasy novel based on a Dungeons and Dragons game that came out a couple years back. This publisher put out the game, and they wanted to invite some authors in to write some fiction around this game setting. And they invited me in, and I gave them my idea. For it, and they loved it, and we put it out, and that became To Slay a God, which is just a basically your classic fantasy adventure with knights and swords and magic and talking weapons and all kinds of fun stuff. It's just a lot of fun. That was great. That came out in June, and I just finished a screenplay, a horror comedy screenplay called Every Day is Halloween. And my manager, my representative, is excited about it. He took that on and is, as we speak, shopping it around town. So that's my newest, most exciting thing. And lastly, I have a short story that called "The God of Rock," and it is sort of a Twilight Zoney, more intense version of that. And that's going to be in an anthology coming up called Blood Fiction Volume 4, and that comes out I think next week.
Now going back to your screenplays, okay, so tell us which screenplays you have written, and you mentioned that one is in production right now.
Yes, yes. I'll start with that one. That was
Yes.
a few years back. I was invited or hired, I should say, by actress and producer Gina Nemo, who was on 21 Jump Street, and she was producing an independent science fiction film, but she didn't have a script for it. So she gave me a lot of notes as to what the kind of the general ideas she had, and she wanted me to flesh out the characters and fill in the gaps and create the story. And so I did that, and our timeline was so tight to get to the filming date that she invited me onto set as the script supervisor so I could, make changes to the script on the fly if we needed to, and just sort of be there to help out. And we filmed it over a 10-day period in Ojai, California, and it was an amazing experience. being a writer on set and seeing what really needs there to be in the script or not in the script was a crash course in learning experience, and I loved it. And that movie is currently in post-production, and Gina has indicated it will come out this year.
Oh, how exciting. It sounds
Yes.
like what you've been writing about could possibly be made into movies as well, like Metcraft. Uh,
That
is
is
is that a goal of yours as well?
definitely the end game. Mechcraft was I might imagine it as a film trilogy first before I even did the books. And so now the books are out and they're gaining momentum with a fan base. Um, I'm really looking forward to trying to make those into a film trilogy or a TV series where each book is a season of a show. And my manager is on board with that, and he's already put Metcraft, the first screenplay, in the hands of different producers. So we're still waiting on answers for that. That is definitely a goal, and I'm still expanding the Metcraft intellectual property, the franchise. There was a song that got produced for it. A band approached me a few years ago and asked if they could write a song because they love the story so much, and I was like, I'm so flattered. So of course I said yes, and the song came out a couple years ago. There's been a short story published, and I was invited to by the same company who did the fantasy novel for me. They invited me to write the Metcraft tabletop role playing game, which is like basically Dungeons and Dragons, but with Metcraft. My characters, my settings, and all the different fun stuff that's in the book. And so that's currently in development right now. We're working on that as we speak.
Now, I have to ask you all of those writer type questions. So, what is your
Sure.
process? Because it sounds like you have been far more successful than many other aspiring writers. You are a writer, you've had things done. So, tell us about your process.
And it is always a slog. It's always a journey. You're always trying to get the next level. So it's a never ending thing where you have to have so much persistence and a thick skin because rejection is as part of the deal. So much so. But my process is once I have an idea and once I've outlined it, because I outline like crazy, because if I don't, I will write myself into a corner and mess it up every time. So I outline extremely a lot. And I then take it. My writing process is usually, if I can, if I've got a deadline, I will do 2 to 3 hours a night on weekdays, and I'll take one of the weekend days and do a marathon if I can, like which is usually 10 to 12 hours. And this is when I have a deadline, and I really like deadlines because they force me into action. And that is my writing process. Now, if I'm just my for my own personal stuff and I don't have a deadline, my manager's not on me for anything, and I'm just writing for me, it's a much more zen process. I will maybe write an hour a night or take a night off. I give myself the grace to not write if I'm not the mood is not hitting me, which is a positive because then it's a good mental state, but it's also a negative because there's a tendency to kind of slack off too much. So it's always walking that balance. And that's pretty much my process. If I have a deadline, I'm aggressive. And if I don't, I try and pull back just to have a good work-life balance.
A lot of writers talk about the fact that they have read numerous books and they continue to read lots of other authors and other writers. Do you do the same? Tell us about what you do to kind of, inform your writing.
Sure. And it's been interesting because when I first started out, I was huge fan. I'm still am a fan of, all the classics, Stephen King, Clive Barker, Anne Rice, Dean Koontz. All those people are very much in my wheelhouse of what I love to read. And I still love those. But I find in the last 5 years, I've really switched over to reading the books of the independent writers that I'm connected with on social media. There's so much talent, there's so much skill out there that I've enjoyed diving into their worlds, even though they're not known yet or not famous yet. Their quality work is top shelf. And I find it inspires me to up my own game because I'm reading what they're doing and it's just incredible. So I read sci-fi, fantasy, horror, but I will also dive into dramas and comedies just to sort of make myself a more well-rounded writer.
How has your work changed over the years?
Oh, that's a good question. I would say when I first began, because I'm a Gen X. I grew up in the '80s with all the Spielberg movies and George Lucas, Star Wars, all that big spectacle kind of thing, and so that really influenced my writing a lot. And I would say when I first started writing, I was a lot about the spectacle more than the characters. And as I've gotten older, I've realized that it's really the spectacle means nothing if we don't care about the characters. And so I really focus hard on character development because I want the audience to love and care about or hate different characters. And so I will really make that top priority. And then when the spectacle happens, it's much more important and impactful.
What I've read about you is that you had a very interesting childhood and a very interesting experience as a child that led you to pursue this career. So tell us that story.
Oh yes, I call this my origin story because it is it's crazy. So at 7 years old, my mother and I were watching classic horror movies, the old Dracula, old Frankenstein. And they weren't, to me at seven, they weren't that scary. They were just interesting. But as the evening wore on, my mom dozed off and I kept watching. And then the horror classic Night of the Living Dead came on. And I was terrified. But I couldn't look away. I was riveted to the screen because I had to see how these people in this house were going to possibly survive these cannibalistic zombie things that I didn't have any idea what those were. And I'd say after about a week of nightmare fueled nights, I think my mom got tired of me screaming in the middle of the night. So she had this idea she said, well, why don't you try writing a scary story of your own? And I thought maybe she felt that it would just sort of exorcise those demons out of me. And I took her up on the idea and I wrote out a story. And I think that first one was about aliens. I don't remember exactly, but I immediately became hooked on the idea that I could just from my own imagination put something on paper and it's a story. And so from 7 years old on, I've been writing stories. My very first publication came when I was my late teens, was just some unknown magazine, if I'm being technical, but my real first publication was Mechcraft at what, 2016, 2017.
Well, now you give back. I mean, you've learned a lot, you've developed your craft. So tell us about all the speaking that you do. You're at like every convention out there. So tell us about and every conference. So tell us about that.
And that's important to me is paying it forward because I learned everything I learned by doing it myself. I didn't have a mentor in the marketing world, and I'm in the process world. Every writer has their own process, and I respect all that. But I know a lot of authors come to me and they're like, well, how do I get my book out there? How do I sell it? How do I publish it? How do I network and all these things? And since 2014, I've been really pushing myself in those directions. And so I give advice whenever I can, but I decided I needed to organize it and put it out there in a form. And I do speeches on it. I do lectures. I do workshops. I have a workshop that I've been doing for the last couple of years, about once or twice a year, about author branding, marketing, and networking, because those are three things that authors really typically don't want to deal with. But I try and show a way that you can do it and still have your life and not be on social media posting all day and or not feeling uncomfortable networking with people. It's important to me to help authors get their word out because if nobody knows about their book, no one's going to read their book and they need to get themselves out there. So yeah, I'll do speaking engagements and workshops and I have freebies to give away on my website, things like that.
So what are some of the top questions that emerging authors and writers direct to you?
Oh yeah. One of the biggest ones is getting an agent. And I get that one so much. And really the truth of the matter is, as if you're writing books, you don't need an agent. You really don't. I mean, they're wonderful to have if you do happen to connect with one, they can help put you in places for marketing, but you can get yourself published, whether it's self-publishing or through one of the hundreds of independent publishers out there. It's not as hard as people think. That is probably my number one question, is that part of it. And then the other part, I'd say the number two question is, how do I get more eyes on my stories? How do I get myself out there marketing wise? And because it seems so overwhelming to people, where to begin and what's a good strategy. And so I sort of lay out step by step, even what I did and what I think works. And that usually helps people.
You mentioned earlier that there was a need early on to get more of a following for your Mechcraft book and your ideas about Mechcraft. What exactly did you do to increase your following?
And I harnessed the power of social media. And this is back in the day when there was no TikTok and Instagram wasn't a thing yet. Facebook was the thing. And there was these great Facebook groups where you join and it's like a club, of like-minded people of the fans of this or fans of that. And I just started coming on to different writer ones and groups that had readers who were into science fiction. And I would just start talking about not just my story, but I would engage with what are you guys reading and what's your favorite movie in science fiction, and then just getting to know people on a personal level, and that's how it starts. I really just engaged with an audience, and I would occasionally drop, hey, I have this book, or hey, this is what my book's about, or it's coming out next year, or something like that, and just sort of get some interest, but not beat it over their heads. I didn't want to like just become there preaching my book because that's just no one wants to hear that, and I wouldn't want to hear that. So really, I just engaged as much as I could, and I've been able to do that for most of the years. As the audience has grown, it's really impossible to discuss with every single person. But I do address my comment sections now, when they get filled up with questions and concerns. I do answer every comment, so I make it a point to do that now.
Yeah, let's talk also about publishers. I was in a conversation not long ago with somebody about this issue. A lot of people just cannot get into, the major publishers, the top publishers,
Mhm.
and with them. And there's also self-publishing, but there's a lot of work involved in that. What do you think? What are some of the alternatives? I've heard about, you mentioned, I think, smaller publishers.
Mhm.
Tell us your thoughts about getting a publisher in general.
Sure, sure. It's true. The big five, they call them, are almost impossible. They won't even reply to your emails unless you are a name already. They're just too big now. And self-publishing is great now, especially because the tools are so much easier to self-publish, but you are doing literally every piece of work yourself, and it's a lot of work. And thankfully, I think the stigma of self-published is gone. People are accepting of self-published work now because the quality is so high. But there is a middle ground that I utilized. There are hundreds of smaller publishers, ranging from, the boutique tiny publisher to publishers that have a couple hundred clients that are still, so they're still considered independent and medium. And there's a lot of really legit high quality publishers out there. And I'm gonna tell you my secret. I used a database, a website that's free to use called querytracker.net, and they are housing a database of hundreds and hundreds of independent publishers and literary agents. And you go into this database, you create an account for free, and you can literally organize a list of by search. Like search for publishers who accept new authors, or publishers who are looking for science fiction, or that, and it really will deliver a lot for you. And that's how I got my publishers. Is I submitted 8 queries, and the fourth one said yes.
So
And
you
I
got very, very fortunate, but you worked hard to get to that point, right?
Yes, you've got to make your work quality. You've got to make your work presentable and desirable. The publisher has to read your work and think, I can make money off this. This is a business. So they have to look at your work and say, I can market this, or I can put this on my in my online store and sell it.
What do you think is the best way to gauge what is interesting to the public at any particular time, like 2026? What do you think
Mm.
audiences are looking for? How do you figure it out?
So it's really difficult. And I almost try not to, because it is such um, a fluid thing. It's ever changing, and things that I read other people predicting which way entertainment will go, sci-fi will go. Sometimes it goes that way, sometimes it doesn't. And so I just sort of gauge, I kind of use the past as, if certain stories, let's say of my own personal career, if certain stories are picking up momentum and steam as far as sales go or talk, I'll kind of pay attention to that. If I like this, for example, last year, To Slay a God far outshined all my other work, I think because it had the D&D name attached to it. And the name is kind of provocative, the title, To Slay a God. Everyone's like, well, what is that? And it sold more than in that short period of time than a lot of my other books. And so I was like, well, I need to pay attention to this. And so I've been focusing a lot of my attention on that. In fact, the publisher of that wants a sequel already. So I'm even as I'm doing all these other things, I'm making notes on a sequel. So I try and just sort of pay attention to what people are talking about right now. It's hard to say what the future will be, but there are people who are good at that, using data to crunch numbers and crunch audiences and opinions, and they put out stuff that I pay attention to, but I just don't know if it's going to be real or not.
Tell us about your goals and your hopes and wishes for 2026.
Oh, that's a good one. I have already communicated with a couple of businesses on landing a more steady income of writing jobs, writing gigs. There's a company that is going to be offering to vetted authors the chance to take their book and convert it to a screenplay that company will then market. And I've been in business with this company for several years, and so I know they're kind people and legit people and will genuinely help authors. And I will be staffed as a screenwriter, taking the novels of the authors who want this and converting it to a screenplay. And that'll be a steadily paying gig for me. That's number one, is to make a more steady income as a writer. Number two, to see one of my screenplays hopefully sell and maybe get produced. The production would probably be next year, but if I could sell something this year, it'd be wonderful. And my manager, thankfully, is working very hard. He's got three of my screenplays in the hands of producers right now, so I'm very pleased with his efforts.
And then what about in the next few years? And what do you expect 2027, now till like 2030? What do you feel, what do you hope that your career will look like?
Oh, sure, sure. Well, if I'm using my vision board and everything goes on track, I will be retired from the day job, and I will be full-time writing screenplays and novels. Mechcraft will be in production as a film trilogy or TV series. I would be happy with that. Hello, Netflix. And I will be busier than I've ever been writing projects that I absolutely love. Because doing what you love is the most important thing.
It sure is. Well, you've done very, very well. You've made many contributions to this industry, and you are giving back. You're paying it forward by sharing the knowledge. So I want to thank you so much for being on our show, and I wish you the best of luck in 2026.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a lot of fun. I appreciate it.
And thank you for joining us for this edition of American Stories. I'm Saida Pagan.